These are the worst 5 losses that the Essendon Football Club have gone through in the life of my guest, sports journalist, the CEO of Footyology. You've worked for The Age, 3AW, Channel 7.
Yeah, at times SEN, Optus Vision back in the late 90s. So it's fair to say I'm a veteran of the industry.
Probably easier to say who he hasn't worked for. He hasn't worked for Footy Classified. So, Rohan Connolly, you're such a great writer and broadcaster. I want to bring out the nuffy in you because I know you're a Bombers fan. Yeah. Journalists have to be neutral. Go against that instinct. Yeah. Bring out the nuff. What has caused you pain as a Bombers fan?
Oh, well, there's been heaps of them, really. I mean, you make me think. There's been too many times probably when I've been in a professional setting and behaved like a nuffy. So apologies to anyone who's been affected by that. But it wasn't hard to come up with the painful moments. Probably easier than the good moments. So. Probably the 5th worst loss I can remember, and it's quite relatively recent. It's from 2022, round 19, Essendon v Collingwood at the MCG.
Yes.
Painful year for the Bombers. Painful couple of decades for the Bombers, let's be honest. I must admit, it really got to me, this one, because it was a stage where I was sort of questioning just how emotionally invested I was in it now. And then, of course, they actually pulled out a decent performance for most of the day and were beating Collingwood. And I thought, Collingwood are going all right. This is actually good. And I could feel my passion kicking in. And then, nail-biting last quarter. And I thought, oh, please. And then... poor Harry Jones had a shot at goal for the Bombers to ice the game with literally seconds remaining on the clock.
Yep.
Misses the shot.
It's the post, I believe.
He did. Yep. And I thought, well, surely they can survive a kick in. Well, no, they couldn't.
No.
Because it was one of the worst defensive setups in history. History will record, of course, that the ball ends up in the arms of Jamie Elliott somewhere near...
In a 2-on-1 marking contest.
With Kyle Langford, who featured on Anzac Day recently. But yes, and somehow managed to outmark them both and right on the boundary. Still a pretty hard shot. The odds are against him. But, being quite fatalistic about my Essendon experiences, I sort of had a sinking feeling at that stage. And then, bang. I mean... Credit where it's due. It was one of the great shots at goal.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, don't worry about it. They've had their fun. Don't worry about that.
Well, I have to say I absolutely lost my you-know-what. I was still filthy about it and reacted in a very juvenile fashion on Twitter. Not for the first or last time, probably, Danny, it's fair to say. And got in a bit of trouble with one of my employers about that. So sorry, guys. I did apologise profusely at the time, but not one of my more mature responses to defeat. But that was really galling. If there was an upside, it sort of reminded me that I still did have a bit of passion as a Bomber fan.
Number 4.
All right, number 4, also relatively, I guess the more recent hurts sort of stick in your memory more a bit. So this one's actually from last year, and Essendon had a pretty reasonable year under Brad Scott. They were in the 5th, actually, as late as round 17. I'm thinking, we're back in town.
Here we go.
Of course, thought too quickly because they got stitched up by Geelong, and then they got stitched up by Yule Mob, I think, and then they just scraped over the line against both West Coast and North, who, with apologies to Eagles and Roos fans, are pretty ordinary. So,
at that time they were.
So the alarm bells should have been ringing about going up to Sydney to play GWS, who were really starting to come into a bit of form. You could tell within 10 minutes what was going to happen this day. The Bombers, they just, not only were they not switched on, they clearly didn't want to be there, and in some cases might as well not have been there. You could have used witches' hats with probably more effect. 7-goal first quarter. I think they kicked another 7 in the third quarter. And after a while, I don't know if you've experienced this, but sometimes you get this macabre sort of, it's almost perverse. You're playing so badly, you want to see how badly can my side actually lose. So I'm not one for turning it off and avoiding it. I just stuck it out, and it was just like, you have got to be kidding me. In the end, 126 points. And basically, I think most Essendon fans would feel that all the gains that have been made during the year were wiped out in one shocking afternoon. There was an encore, however, a Friday night game in the last round against Collingwood, which was 70-odd points. So It was a pretty miserable end to 2023, but that GWS game, it was like new side, plasticky sort of stadium, established side gets blown out of the water. You're thinking, I'm never going to see any more success in my lifetime, and I probably won't, to be perfectly honest. But that was a particularly grim afternoon.
It's quite cold out at West Sydney, and then you leave the ground, you go, I need a beer, but there's no pubs.
Well, no pubs, and you can't get a taxi.
No. The third worst loss of the Essendon Bombers in the life of Rohan Connolly.
All right, so this is going way back. 1981, I was 16 years old. 81 for Essendon fans was such an incredible roller coaster.
So you'd been terrible. You know, Essendon had been brilliant for the first 50 years of its existence, and then went through a decade of not winning anything, which would have been so freaky for you.
Well, not for me, because I grew up knowing them as a mediocre or ordinary club. So, the 70s were very barren. Anyway, Kevin Sheedy had turned up as coach for 81. A lot of expectation. They got off to this shocking start. They lost 5 of their first 6 games.
Oh.
And Sheeds actually talked about pulling on the boots again. That's how bad it got. He did. He really did. But something just clicked. And all of a sudden, they went on this winning run, and they won 16 games in a row.
Wow.
The start had been so bad that they had to keep winning, unfortunately, which built the pressure. So they got to this last home and away game of the year against Geelong, who were having a really good year themselves.
Is this at Windy Hill or at Cardinia?
No, it's at Waverley.
Oh. And,
of course, Waverley... It rained, but it didn't just rain, it bucketed down. Massive crowd. It was 70-something thousand, the crowd that day. But Essendon basically had to win to retain the double chance. Now, this is the days of the old Final 5. So the top team got the week off.
Yep.
2 and 3 played in the qualifying final with a double chance. 4 and 5 elimination final.
Yes.
So Bombers have got to keep winning. We were reasonably confident. We'd beaten Geelong. We didn't beat Geelong earlier in the year, but we thought we had their measure. Anyway, it was wet, it was windy, it was cold, it was a scrap. It was like 5 goals to 4 goals. And Essendon got in front in the last quarter, and me and my mates were sitting behind the goals, and we think, we're there. And all of a sudden, Geelong conjured a couple of goals out of their you-know-whats. Terry Bright, who we used to call Terry Fright, not the most physical player, Terry. And then a guy called Stephen Lunn kicked this goal out of his you-know-what, from miles out. And the Cats hung on and won, knocked Essendon out of third spot by, I think it was 1%.
Oh.
Some minuscule margin. So Essendon got relegated to the elimination final.
I think I know where this is going.
And played Fitzroy, who were their finals bogey team that beaten Essendon in elimination final the year before, would beat them again later on. The Bombers went from being the day of that game against Geelong were flag favourites, were out of it 2 weeks later, and it was devastating. So I was 16. I do remember the night of that loss. I came home, thawed out, threw myself in the shower, and went to one of those Year 11 school parties and got absolutely bat-faced.
What would you be drinking in 1981?
I'll tell you, disturbingly, I remember we had this ritual, VBs. We would go and get a slab of VBs. I would drink 6, and that would get me to a certain point where I could, sort of cavort with the nice girls at school. But if I went past 6 and had 8, I'd be a bit of a mess. And I think that night I might have gone for 10.
Oh.
I had to drown the sorrows. But incredible year, 1981. And I still remember it very fondly, but a sour end. And unfortunately, that day was it.
The second worst loss that Rohan Connolly has endured as an Essendon fan?
Oh, this one really hurt. This was 1992. Round 20 against Hawthorn at the MCG. Now, I have to say, fortunately, Danny, this one I was spared. I was acting sports editor of a Sunday Age, so for once I didn't go and wasn't privy to it. However, we did have the radio going, so I was able to listen to this cascade of goals. Hawthorn just went absolutely berserk. They kicked 8 goals in every quarter. Oh. Essendon was at sort of the tail end. You had a lot of older players who weren't good enough, and it all sort of came to a horrible steaming pile of this day. Jason Dunstall ended up with 12 goals.
Is that all?
Yeah, probably should have been more. Well, it was the year he kicked 17 against Richmond, so 12 was just a throwaway performance. But they just smashed us, and it was 160 points. Incredibly embarrassing. The upside was that at this point, even Sheeds, the eternal optimist, Sheeds said, "Nah, we're crap," and decided to make some wholesale changes. And the last few rounds of the season, they actually blooded some of the guys who'd go on and become the baby Bombers. But deeply embarrassing because Hawthorn, of course, had that incredible rivalry with Essendon.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what's funny about that too. Like, so 3 grand finals in a row in the mid-'80s. Essendon win 84-85. I still love to give Rodney Eade, Terry Wallace, Dipper, Derby, all those guys. They're still very hung up on 84. They reckon they should have won that.
That's a great game.
But we used to, at the end of 85, we were sort of, the talk was, and I was riding footy then, that's how old I am, but it was all about, Hawthorn are gone, they're finished.
Oh.
Well, history would show that they had the last laugh, making, 8 grand finals in a row.
Yep.
And 92... they'd won the last of those in 91, but they were still a very good side. And my boys, of course, were very crap this afternoon. So deeply, deeply unpleasant afternoon at the MCG, that one. And
I don't believe either team made finals that year.
No, the Hawks did. They lost to West Coast in Perth. Only just, though. They'd beaten them the year before on their way to the flag, lost narrowly to them in 92, and the Eagles went on and won the flag. So the bit of luck, the Hawks might have done something, but they were making finals for a couple more years after that. Essendon had to go to the well again with the baby Bombers, but that's one of my good stories. That
is, that you've done well. I've noticed some people can turn these worst losses videos into very positive things.
Unusual for me to find the glass half full, let me tell you.
Well, and it's a positive story because Carlton lose a grand final. And the worst loss of Rohan Connolly's Essendon supporting life, which is his whole life, is this game.
Well, it's another one, fortunately, I was able to avoid, mainly because it was in Sydney, Sunday afternoon. And during this, after the Swans moved to Sydney from being South Melbourne, of course, we all became familiar with that. Every second Sunday, parking in front of a TV, watching the Swans up in Sydney.
It would have been a novelty back then.
Well, yeah, it was. And they were pretty good at this stage. They'd been, Jeffrey Edelston had taken them over, so you had the pink helicopters and
the Swanettes.
And that reminds me of that Warwick Kappa line where he does the throwbacks and he says a pair of bright young newcomers called Bros had the world
at their feet.
Oh, you know that one?
Yeah, for all the Get This listeners, there we go. Anyway.
Warwick Kappa going berserk. Anyway, Essendon, the glory days were well and truly over, and they had a pretty miserable year. This was towards the back end. The Swans actually kicked 30 plus goals 3 weeks in a row. The first week against West Coast, Essendon in the middle, and then they did it against Richmond as well. And it was like it was just like a procession. SCG, pretty small ground, so kick a goal, goes back to the middle.
A few of them for kick-outs after you got behind.
Might have been clearance goal, and then what has stayed with me for 35 or whatever years since is that after every goal, the early days of marketing and commercialisation of the footy, they played a little theme song after. And it was
like a fight song in the NFL.
Well, we have the Gold Coast.
Yeah,
it was sort of like an early version of that. And it was something about show 'em Sydney, and then it finished off Go Mighty Swans.
If anyone has that audio, please put in the comments.
Any Essendon supporters my age would be seared in their memory. Anyway, it was just a procession. 36 goals they kicked for the game. The margin. Essendon's heaviest ever losing margin, 163 points. It's just ugly stuff. If you're wondering, Warwick Kappa only kicked 6 that day. They shared the love around a bit. I think Stevie Wright, not Evie parts 1, 2 and 3, but the little redhead rover, he kicked 5 goals. Jared
Hang
Healy,
on, you're going Stevie Wright for you is the musician.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm thinking of the deadpan comedian from the United States.
It's a generational thing,
there we
Danny,
go.
Obviously. I told you I'm old. Jared Healy, who you may know only as a special... He once played.
What?
He won a
the host of On the Couch?
Correct.
That's amazing.
Correct. Well, he had to have some pretext for being on TV,
true.
sure. He kicked 4 goals. Anyway, it was ugly. I've got to say, at that stage, you would have thought no one can possibly stop the Swans winning the flag, and they did this a couple of years in a row, they combusted in the finals, and Hawthorn smashed them in the qualifying final, and then they got beaten in the first semi-final by Fitzroy.
Oh, wow.
Oh, no, sorry, that was the year before, 87. Who they lose to? Might have been Melbourne, I think, the week after.
Yeah.
And they were done and dusted, and really, as a power, they were done and dusted for about the next 10 years. So there was an upside to that story as well. But again, dark days for the Bombers, and that stupid little theme just seared on my consciousness.
Makes everything worse. Like when you sit, it's bad enough losing, but when you're sitting near a dickhead and they're very loud, everything's so much worse.
Well, it's usually how most people describe sitting with me at the footy.
And that's RoCo's list. What do you think he got right? What do you think he got wrong? Feel free to comment below, and we like and subscribe, all that crap, and listen to Footyology. You get involved with that. What else do you want to plug?
Footyology.com.au. Become a patron and help me feed my starving children.